Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Cray. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's Friday, August the 9th. We made it this far. When we come back, the latest on Trudeau's attempts to muzzle you. So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist. Yes, please like the station, hit the bell, smash that like button, because when you do, we beat YouTube suppression and we beat Trudeau's censorship, which incidentally is what this broadcast is all about. Trudeau's continuing censorship. Have you ever noticed when you put a microphone in front of any Liberal cabinet minister, they just can't wait to talk about ending free speech or misinformation or disinformation or safeguarding how we think on the internet, how we communicate, what we're thinking about. And their latest buzzword, toxicity, if it's toxic. And we're going to watch a clip here from Liberal MP Mark Holland from Ajax, Ontario. He's also the Health Minister, so that makes him the euthanasia czar as well. Now, we've seen lots of clips of Mark Holland in the past. I won't replay them all. You recall him blathering on, actually going into a conniption about summer vacations, that if you go for a trip in the car, that it's setting the world on fire and you have no concern about climate change if you do so. And it's going for that little summer vacation is akin to just turning a blind eye to all of those wildfires out there. Well, that's also the same Mark Holland who went berserk when somebody suggested that perhaps it wasn't a good idea to put people with so-called mental health issues on his euthanasia blacklist. He went nuts about that. This is one of the most partisan MPs who has ever sat in the House of Commons. I remember this joker when he first arrived as an opposition member. They had a sort of a Rat Pack 2, if you will. You remember the one Sheila Copps ran? Well, there was another little trio during the Harper years with that Mark Holland ran. And they were just, of course, always trying to cause trouble, trying to cause mischief. That's what the opposition does, I know. But this guy could never work with the government on any issue. Just like now that he is government, he cannot work with the opposition on any issue because he's so partisan. He's such a liberal, capital L. And that's what this man's all about. But here he is at a news conference on this Wednesday. And he's talking about his wonderful dental plan, which, of course, nobody's really buying into because it's only for those who have no teeth because they're too young or have no teeth because they've lost them because they're too old. But, of course, he has to get to censorship. And it's interesting because he addresses, one of the reporters asked him about this, these Pierre Poilievre bots, supposed Pierre Poilievre bots that are out there. And it's absolutely ludicrous because I don't believe for a minute Poilievre is even doing this. I think it's Jagmeet Singh, actually, or I think it's Justin Trudeau. Well, let's listen to Mark Holland explain why we have to get rid of all of this toxic speech that's on social media. And it's got to happen now.
On another topic, there's been conversation in recent days about the use of bot farms on social media. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, is that something you're concerned about heading into the next election? And do you think the federal government or the Liberal Party needs to do more to try to combat the prevalence of these bot accounts?
Well, I don't know about you, Rachel, but I mean, you go online. I don't stay very long. It's pretty toxic, and we wouldn't talk to each other on the street like that. And there are certainly forces in the world that are autocratic and seek to undermine democracy, who want to fuel divisions that are between us and get us to talk to each other in incredibly disrespectful and cruel ways.
Let's stop him there for a minute. Does that remind you of another liberal who's always talking about how these forces are working against democracy. So Holland is suggesting here, actually, he's claiming here that he doesn't spend much time on the internet. Well, that's virtually impossible today because that's just about where everything is happening on the internet. So he doesn't spend much time. It's just too toxic for him. Just too toxic. Is that because there's other alternatives to CBC existing on social media? Is that perhaps what he's really getting at here? He's not getting the news that's reinforcing his idea of how the world should be. He's not seeing the news on the internet 100% of the time that is reinforcing the Liberal Party policies. But once again, it's about toxicity. So what is toxicity? Why was it toxic? This is one of the most toxic MPs that's ever existed. He is constantly name-calling. He's constantly suggesting the opposition are authoritarian, that the opposition have no concern for democracy. This is a very toxic MP, probably the most toxic health minister we've ever had. But he's got the gall to suggest it's the internet and social media is toxic.
I think whether or not it's a bot or a human, when somebody is speaking without humanity, when somebody is hiding behind, username 12768, and they give you their opinion, and that opinion is toxic and makes people feel bad, then we have to think about as a society why that's allowed. It took us a long time with newspapers and television to figure out, how it worked. And there were some dark forces that used those new mediums in very nefarious ways. And I think we're seeing that here. There's too much toxic negativity. An opinion is fine, but the cruelty with which it's being unleashed should be rejected. And
an opinion is fine as long as it's an opinion that reflects my opinion. That's really what he's saying here. And if it's not your opinion, if Mark Holland doesn't like your opinion, it's toxic. And that's just something I don't want to see, he says. So this is a typical liberal way of dealing with any information they don't like on the internet. It's toxic. This is where they're going with this now, because they've pretty well tired out the expression misinformation, disinformation, and they really didn't pander too much to malinformation in this country. That was more a phenomena in the UK, in Europe. So they realize we've woken up. I don't mean woke in the progressive values. We have realized that these terms are meaningless, just like toxic is a meaningless term. The closest Mark Holland comes to defining toxic in this little dissertation is it makes you feel bad. Well, Mark Holland makes me feel bad all the time. Every time I listen to Mark Holland in the House of Commons, whether he's talking about I can't take summer trips because that's consuming gas and that's creating a carbon footprint, or whether he's talking about how great his euthanasia program is. I think it's very depressing what he's doing to people in hospitals. I think that's very depressing. I think that makes me feel bad. His euthanasia program makes a lot of Canadians feel bad. But maybe that's the point. When they feel bad, they apply for medical assistance in dying, aka euthanasia. So is that what this is all about? But Mark Holland just can't get to the point.
I think we have to be very circumspect, unfortunately, about what we see online. There are forces that are running these bots and trying to overwhelm the internet to give an appearance of a particular opinion or a consensus around something that simply isn't true, and at worst is seeking to undermine our democracy.
So seeking to undermine our democracy. That is, once again, a Trudeau buzzword, is it not? Because this is something Justin Trudeau is always warning us about, that there are people out there trying to undermine our democracy. And, that is what makes this so interesting. And that is why it's so dangerous to allow people like this to be implementing policy, because they use vague terms that really don't mean anything. And I think that's the point of this news conference here, where he starts off talking about, and actually when he talks about why people aren't accepting his dental plan with open arms, why they're not embracing it the way he thinks they should be, he blames the conservatives for their, yeah, you guessed it, misinformation. So a little earlier in the news conference, he goes on about conservatives' misinformation, and that just sort of leads into his tirade about all of this unpleasant material on the internet that makes him feel bad. And for him to suggest that he doesn't talk to people that way, does it every day during question period. And have you ever seen this guy in action? This is a truly toxic MP. Anyway, but I wanted to mention that because this leads into a story here. This is quite funny. This Holly Doan of Blacklock's report found this the other day, and I've got like glasses on to read it. This is a liberal MP from the Ottawa area here, and she says Canada is slowly losing our democracy due to mean tweets and clickbait media, says MP. I closed my constituency office. Yeah, you're kidding. Because I fear for my safety. Well, maybe you should just shut down your computer if that's your problem. Because I mean, this is absolutely comical. She shuts down her constituency office because she can't stand mean tweets. Well, in fact, she doesn't understand that they're no longer tweets anymore. They're posts on X. Twitter has changed its name. But this Liberal MP obviously has not been attuned to changes in social media for quite a while. So you're telling me she's getting all kinds of it's so bad she can't go into her constituency office. Can you tell me how A correlates to B? If you don't want to read the mean tweets, just don't turn on your computer, or just don't look at social media. Do the work you're supposed to be doing. And I wonder if she's doing any work. But this has nothing to do with sitting in your office. Actually, it's the obverse. If she really wants to commune one-on-one, person to person, and not have to deal with all of these mean people in cyberspace, maybe she should try going to work and sitting in her constituency office and listening to what her constituents say. Or is that just going to be more mean speech for her? You know, anything that just makes me feel bad. So is this now where the Liberals are going with this war on free speech? It just makes you feel bad. Anything that makes you feel bad is toxic and therefore misinformation. Just it seems to add. But of course, there's no correlation to any of this. But this is all designed for one basic thing. And what's that? It's to buttress Justin Trudeau's justifying his war on free speech through the Online Harms Act. And I know a lot of you get glassy-eyed when I talk about the Online Harms Act. But this is coming. This is coming, folks. It's coming, and it's going to mean things like house arrest for thinking the wrong thoughts. We've all seen the video of the poor guy in the UK who was literally arrested for what he says, oh, this is a Facebook crime. And that's coming to Canada if the Online Harms Act passes. And you can bet the Liberals are going to use every possible argument to suggest it's justified. They started off the campaign by saying it was all about preventing harm and protecting children. Of course, that was a complete red herring. It had nothing to do with what the legislation is designed to do, which is to strangle free speech. Just like Mark Holland is saying here. Just too much toxicity on the internet. We have to stop it. We have to ensure it just isn't allowed. You don't have a right to read it. You don't have a right to know it's even there because it's just too toxic. And it's going to make you feel bad too. And when a Liberal MP has the gall to shut down her constituency office because she doesn't like what people are telling her on the internet, it goes to show you this is just a pathetically inept and corrupt government. Are the Conservatives going to do any better? Well, this story alarmed me. I read this morning. And this is the Conservative House Leader. And she's talking. She put a video up on her internet page talking about defunding the CBC. Now, as we all know, that is probably the most popular, if not in the top, well, next to the carbon tax, defunding the CBC is the most popular platform Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party have. I have been to Poilievre's rallies, and every time he says, we're going to defund the CBC, the crowd roars its approval because we've been waiting decades for a Conservative Party of Canada leader or any leader in Canada to say we've had enough with spending $1.3 billion a year on this inept, bloated waste of money. An organization that fires journalists while it gives bonuses to its executives. An organization that continues to whine every year about it never having enough money, even though it gets paid advertising to supplement the taxpayer dollars that keep it running. So when Pierre Poilievre says, hey, we're going to defund the CBC, yes, there is an enormous appeal to that. But here's the hitch here, and this is what worries me, is because in the last couple of months of the parliamentary session, Poilievre kept talking about keeping Radio-Canada alive with taxpayer dollars because that was somehow necessary for French culture in this country. Now, I don't know why that is necessary to preserve French culture. Why do we need a state broadcaster for Quebec alone? Quebec does just fine, thank you, with lots of French programming on the radio, on the television, on the internet. They've been doing it for decades, actually. So it's not an argument to suggest we have to preserve French culture with Radio-Canada. But what worries me here is this Conservative MP talked about preserving CBC radio, and she was told to take it down immediately. She had to change the video and not talk about keeping CBC radio alive. And that, to me, is a double standard that's very bad. Now, I don't want to keep CBC radio alive. I think it should be privatized. I think it should be defunded. Nor do I think we should be somehow keeping Radio-Canada alive because it's somehow preserving French culture. There's a double standard here. And this, to me, is a weak link in the Conservative argument. It's got to be defunding all of the CBC, Radio-Canada included, not to keep a little piece of it alive so it continue to grow, because you know that's exactly what happens when you allow a crown corporation, government media to sustain it in any way. It will continue to grow, and the arguments will continue that, we need to expand this service. So I'm a little worried about that. I always say, when the Conservatives say it right and they do it right, I applaud them. But when there's a problem, I'll call them out on it. And I think I have to do that here because this is a double standard. We do not need Radio-Canada to continue to survive. And we should not be censoring MPs' videos because they don't quite sync with the party policy. This is definitely an issue. Now, I want to move on to something else here because throughout the week, I've been working quite a lot with the Post Millennial. You know I do that. And I've been working a lot with it this week. And to tell you the truth, I have not been reading a lot of mainstream media. And I'll get to this story in a minute because this is quite fascinating. Because Donald Trump actually said that if Kamala Harris is elected with her running mate, this Governor Tim Walz, it's going to lead to a communist-style government. I think he's dead on with that. And I just want to read from my story in the Post Millennial, and I think you might enjoy this. Because Donald Trump is asked what his reaction was when Kamala Harris chose Tim Walz as her running mate. He says, I would say my reaction is, I can't believe it, Trump said of Walz being named as Harris's running mate. I never thought that he was going to be the one that was picked. Trump later added, there's never been a ticket like this. This is a ticket that would want this country to go communist immediately, if not sooner, Trump said. Trump summed up Harris's record as a far-left Democrat who was out of touch with ordinary Americans. She's for no fracking. She's for defund the police. She was the original defunder of the police. She was the original no cash bail, cashless bail, which has caused havoc. And look how she's destroyed San Francisco, Trump continued. So while I was doing all of these stories this week, I must have written about 20 stories for the Post Millennial. I encourage you to go on and read some of those. It's largely been United States news. But of course, I did the story based on the how Trudeau and Biden were colluding to deplatform the Freedom Convoy. But what I discovered is that if you don't watch the mainstream media, and I increasingly watch social media, I'm not just because I'm on social media, but because I think that's the dominant force in media today. You see more and more people getting their news from YouTube, from Rumble, from X, Facebook, and these media. You see less and less people are watching CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News. But when you watch those mainstream media, you get a completely different version of the world. And what do I mean? Well, the mainstream media insists that Kamala Harris is now the best thing to ever happen to the Democratic Party. And she's way ahead now, 5 points ahead of Donald Trump in the polls. I don't believe that for a minute. That is, how can a woman who is the most unpopular vice president in history, lower approval rating than Spiro Agnew just before he was forced to resign over a tax evasion issue? He was the most unpopular vice president in history. She had ratings about 25% approval. How can she suddenly go from that to 5 points ahead of Donald Trump in the presidential race when she has said and done absolutely nothing new? She's still the failed border czar. She's still the woman who can't put a sentence together, who has no conception of policy matters, who has absolutely no idea of what she's talking about. She talks to people in baby talk half the time. So how did she suddenly jump 5 percentage points ahead of Donald Trump in this presidential campaign? It's bogus. And she's suddenly hugely popular with the American people. I'm not buying it for a minute. And she's getting huge crowds. Have you seen the Donald Trump rallies? I mean, you know what's going on here. The Democrats knew they were going to lose under Biden. And they even knew that they were going to lose under Kamala Harris. Sorry, don't ever say Kamala. All right. Don't ever mispronounce Kamala because it's bad news for you. But the Democrats knew they had to do something, and that is to create the illusion that she's unbeatable, even though she's entirely susceptible and vulnerable to a host of issues. She has no policy background that's even worth bringing up. And she's chosen a running mate in Tim Walz, who is as bad as she is on the issues, who's as weak as she is on the issues. So do you think this is going to work for the Democrats? I don't think so, because most people are not watching the mainstream news that tells them these lies, that tells them she's really great, she's really popular, and she's outselling Donald Trump at her rallies. We know it's not true, because if you watch the alternative media, if you're in tune with what's happening on social media, you know what's really happening in the world. And it's not Kamala Harris. So I'm going to dive deeper into this throughout the week in terms of what the mainstream media is not telling us that the social media is. And we need to always be aware that there is a narrative out there that's being sold by politicians, by woke politicians. In Canada, it's the Liberal Party. In the United States, it's the Democratic Party. And it is a complete fabrication. It does not reflect reality. I want to thank you for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the show. I will be back again tomorrow with more of the news you need to know. And I can tell you this. I'm going to fight this Online Harms Act until we get it defeated in the House, until it doesn't pass third reading. And if it does, I'm going to insist that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives live up to their promise to axe that, just like they promised to axe the carbon tax. Because we are going to be in deep, deep trouble if we lose our freedom of speech in this country. And we're that close from it. If you're watching what's happening in the UK, if you're watching what's happening in Europe, you can see they've already lost it. Thanks for watching today, folks. God bless you, and we'll be back tomorrow.